So good morning students. Today I am going to start with some of the very important topics related to political science and international relations. Today I shall be discussing Antonio Gramsci. But apart from Gramsci, if you feel that there are some specific topics, specific issues that you want me to discuss, that you have challenges or difficulty in understanding, you can definitely write it down in the comment and I shall be discussing them for you. So you see, when we talk about Gramsci, there are some of the misconceptions that I have seen among the students. The very first thing is that many of the students, they write in their answers that Gramsci was a structuralist. This is totally wrong, totally incorrect. Yes, it is a fact that Gramsci is called as theoretician of superstructure because he has broadly discussed about the superstructures and he has focused on how superstructures, they are not completely dependent on the base, but they have an independent existence in themselves and how they are critical to ensuring hegemony. And with regarding this only, Jacques Taxier, he has said that there is no difference between Karl Marx and Antonio Gramsci. Rather, both of them complement each other because Marx was focusing on the economic structure as a whole and Gramsci has its focus specifically on the superstructure. So, though Gramsci is called as theoretician of superstructures because he has discussed about the superstructures in greater detail, he has made Marxism from a crude economic determinism. He has escaped Marxism from being a crude economic method of reference, because if you remember Marx, he was continuously telling, he was constantly telling that everything depends on the base, that is the economic structure. But what Gramsci did, he made it a more sophisticated framework of reference with respect to Marxism. He made Marxism more sophisticated, on whom later on we also see how neo-Marxists, they also derive something, their inspiration from Antonio Gramsci only. So always remember, Gramsci was not a structuralist. Althusser was a structuralist. Nikos Poulanza, he was a structuralist. In fact, when you are talking about 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte by Karl Marx, there also you see the focus on structuralism, but not here. Again, what is instrumentalist approach? What is structuralist approach? That is something that we shall be discussing in Marxism, not here. That is today. That is not our focus. Today we shall be focusing specifically on Gramsci. So you see, when we talk about Gramsci, these are some of the important events of his life. And as it has been said that every thinker is a child of his times. Right? Sabine has said this, that whatever a thinker says, ultimately he is influenced by the ideas, by the theories, by the events, by the happenings of his life. So similarly, we will see how all these happenings during the lifetimes of Gramsci influenced his ideas, his thinking, and he went on to give all those ideas that we shall be discussing in detail. But if you want to discuss Gramsci, he has always been discussed in context of Marxism or in context of the ideas given by Karl Marx. Okay, so before we go to Gramsci, before we discuss in detail about Gramsci, let us look at the ideas of Karl Marx very briefly. Okay, this is not a very detailed discussion about Karl Marx. We are discussing very briefly about Karl Marx and his ideas, so that in contrast to his ideas, we can see how Gramsci has discussed his own ideas, how he has gone for revision of Marx. So you see, when we talk about Karl Marx, he has said about scientific socialism, right? And in his explanation of socialism, in his explanation of capitalism, he has given a base and superstructure model, right? He has said that superstructures are nothing but reflection of the base. And what is this base? This base is your economy, right? And on this economy, you see other superstructures, whether you talk about schools, hospitals, religion, or politics. Everything is dependent on the base, everything is reflection of the base only. So, if you want to change the existing setup, if you want to change the existing capitalistic society, what you need to do is you need to change this base. You simply change the economy, you simply change the economic structure, you simply change the existing capitalistic economic structure and all these elements of the superstructure, that will automatically get changed. This is what Karl Marx has said. This is the first thing. Now, after talking about the superstructure, he has said that how to bring about this revolution. Just a sec, let me get some space. So, base and superstructure. Karl Marx has given some of the very interesting ideas. Karl Marx has said that in terms of classes, he has said that there are multiple classes. Naturally, there are capitalists or bourgeois. Then there will be petty bourgeois. Then naturally there will be the third one, that is proletariats or workers. Marx has said that the economic structure or the capitalistic mode of production is such that this will lead to a cutthroat competition. As a result of competition, naturally going forward, you cannot reduce the cost of input. What you will have to do? You will have to reduce the labor cost, that is cost of production. And how you will reduce the labor cost so that you remain in competition? That is, you will reduce the wages. This will lead to a competition. So, as this competition intensifies, particularly with respect to this petty bourgeois, this will happen. There will be something, some will get co-opted. For example, suppose you have got a small factory. So, as the competition increases, what you will do? You will sell that factory to a bigger capitalist. That's something we have been seeing in case of telecom sector. We have also been seeing in case of FMCG sector. Again, I am explaining this from a Marxist perspective. So, they are getting co-opted into the capitalist class, and the rest, what will happen? They will get relegated to the. You had a business, you could not compete. What will happen? ultimately you will also fall back to the proletariats, because slowly you will lose all your money. You are no more an owner, rather you will be a worker. So this is something what Karl Marx terms as polarization of classes. You can see that previously there were this many classes. Now, because of intense competition, the petty bourgeois, the middle class, they could not compete. So either they got co-opted by the bigger capitalists or they were relegated to the proletariat class. So in the end, because of this polarization, there will be only two classes, that is, ultimately it will be the capitalists and proletariats, right? Okay. Okay. So after this polarization, what will happen? Naturally, the mode of capitalistic production is such that there will be more and more intensified exploitation. क्योंकि the capitalistic mode of production is such that you need to have that cutthroat competition. Because of that competition, the capitalist will be forced to exploit the proletariats. You will be paid only that much so that you can sustain and you can come back to work tomorrow again. This is what Marx says, though this has been refuted by Max Weber. Max Weber, in response to this theory, he has given the idea of proliferation of classes, that how capitalism leads to proliferation of class. Okay, but that is something we shall be discussing in Marxism. This is just about Karl Marx and briefly his ideas. So because of this intensified exploitation, what will happen, that presently these proletariats, they were divided into their caste, religion, race, ethnicity. Because when you did not have this realization that who is the real enemy, you had this identity, that whatever ascribed identity that I had, whether it is about your religious identity or your racial identity or your ethnic identity. So this was your identity previously. But as the exploitation intensifies, this will lead to a realization that my real identity is only the class identity. Okay? So this stage, when you did not have realization of your class identity, you were focused more on your ascribed identity. This is what Marx was telling about. This was the stage of class in itself. Okay? And this, when you have realization that my real identity is only the class identity, there is no other identity, all of these are just created to have a false consciousness, so as to break the class solidarity. So this stage was class for itself. Okay? So till now we have seen that how, because of exploitation, there will be polarization of classes. After polarization of classes, there is a realization, and class in itself converts to class for itself. And class for itself is the stage when the workers, they get this realization that this is only my only identity is my class identity. then there will be solidarity among the proletariats, and this class for itself, realization of class identity, this will be the stage when you will see revolution. Okay, there will be violent revolution to overthrow the state, right? And after this violent revolution, what will happen? There will be Marxist socialism. And what is this socialism? Marx terms this as dictatorship of proletariats. And always remember, this is not the stage when the state withers away. Marx says that when after the revolution there will be some reactionary elements of the capitalist class who will try to reimpose the previous order, that was the previous capitalistic order. So in order to prevent that, there will be a need for state and state authority, and that is why in this stage the state remains. And Marx says that this is the true democracy. Why? Because democracy is the rule of majority, and since proletariats are in the majority and they are in the rule, and that is why, as per Marx, this is the true democracy. Okay? Now, after socialism, once dictatorship of proletariat has been established, now all the means of productions, they will be nationalized slowly. It will go in the hands of community, and through community, through cooperatives, through self-help groups, the production will start. The stage will be, each will work as per his ability, and each one will get as per their need. And as the class difference or the class animosity that has ended, so that is why state is no more needed, because as per Marx, state exists only for the continuation of rule of the capitalistic class. So this will further lead to what Marx calls as communism, which is a stateless and classless society. Okay, so this is what Marx talks about in Das Kapital and Communist Manifesto. Remember, we are not discussing it in greater detail. This was just to explain you, so that it will be far more easier for me to make you understand about how Gramsci has gone on to revise Marxism. Because while explaining Gramsci, I shall be coming back to this page again and again and again. So that is why, let me just okay. So let us now start discussing how Gramsci has gone on to revise this idea given by Karl Marx. Okay. So let us just look at the life and times of Gramsci. As Sabine has said, each thinker is a child of his times. So let us see what was the times of Gramsci and how this influenced his thinking, his readings, his understandings, because of which he went on for revision of Marxism, and he gave idea of hegemony, historical class, historical bloc, integral state, then two-stage revolution, theory of intellectuals and role of organic intellectuals, creating counter-hegemony. All this we shall be looking, but before that, let us look at the life and times of Gramsci. He was born in 1891 in Sardinia in Italy. And he was from a well-to-do family. But his father, he was convicted in a corruption case, in a scandal, and because of which his father went to the jail. Family condition was not good. He had to abandon his studies and ultimately he had to do some casual work. After that, he did continue with, however, somehow he continued with his studies. Later on, what happened was that he got a scholarship. The previous, the king of Italy, from his side, there was a, I think it was 80 peso or something, that was the scholarship for the poorer students for them to study, and he goes to study in the University of Turin. There he was very much active with the Italian Socialist Party, and in fact he went on for joining it in 1913. But you see, Gramsci, he was not very good with health. I think his height was roughly 5 foot or so. He was also humped, जिसे कुबड़ कहते हैं, and he had this frail health. तो जब उसकी तबीयत खराब होती है, when his health went down, financially he went down, when he was very much active politically, as a result, in 1915, he even left his studies. Again, always remember, he was very active with the Socialist Party and he was also continuously writing in the newspapers. Okay? And when you are looking at this Turin, the situation was such that this was the time when all these industries, they were being set in Turin. And the labor unions, they were also coming up. There were continuous exploitation. That is something Gramsci was seeing, and he was in the favor of poor peasants who were continuously being exploited by the rich traders from the mainland. After that, what happened was that in 1917, the Socialist Party that he had joined, most of its leaders, they got arrested, and as a result, Gramsci became a leading socialist voice in the Socialist Party. And in fact, Gramsci had also attended the second Comintern, the Communist International, that was called by Vladimir Lenin, as to how the communist ideas that should be propagated. And he was very much influenced by the Lenin's idea of Communist Party, because he himself had seen in Turin that the workers, the worker unions, they were not in a position to come together, to unite and develop that consciousness, to develop that revolutionary consciousness. As a result, what happened? He went on to form the Communist Party of Italy in 1921. And he also went on to become a member of parliament. He was very much active in politics. But when the fascist rule came in Italy in 1926, he was arrested, and during Gramsci's hearing, the prosecutor had said that his is a brain that should be locked for 20 years. You can imagine the influence or significance of ideas of Gramsci, that such a statement had been said by the prosecutor in the court, that his brain, his mind, his ideas must be shut down for 20 years, and that is what was tried over here. We have already seen that his health was not very good. So he was continuously in a poor state of health. When he went to the prison, his health further deteriorated, and around 1936-37, there was an effort on the part of the government that he should be brought out of the jail and he should be hospitalized so that death of Gramsci should not fall on the hands of the state. However, that could not happen, and in 1937 ultimately he passed away. And while he was in prison, he wrote around 30 books. Total 3000 pages. And that is something that became famous in the form of prison notebook. Okay? So in brief, this was the life and times of Antonio Gramsci. But once we have seen the life and times of Antonio Gramsci, let us now look at what was happening around him, what were the ideas that were being propagated at that point of time. Let us come at this section. Okay. So you know that both Italy and Germany, they got unification by 1871, and after this 1871 there was rapid industrialization, whether acquiring the lands around or in the Africa, the colonies in Africa, which again was one of the factors behind World War I. So while this industrialization was going on, you know that naturally the labor exploitation, that was too much, and that is something Gramsci had been seeing. At the same time, when you look at this time in 1917, you know that Russian Revolution took place, and under the leadership of Vladimir Lenin, Communist Party, that is Bolsheviks, they formed the government in Russia. Later on it went on to become USSR. So while this revolution was going on, Gramsci was in Turin and he was looking at it very closely. So this is something naturally Gramsci thought that okay, whatever Marx had said, that can be brought into reality, that can be materialized. And that is something he was continuously looking at, because at that time he was in the university, and in the university he was also influenced by many scholars, one of which was Benedetto Croce, and another was Giovanni, and there were some others. It was this Benedetto Croce which influenced him too much, because Croce has discussed how it is the cultural values, they have a significant influence over history, and how all these cultural values that go on to shape the, okay. So, and mind you, Croce was one of the leading intellectual brains, leading intellectual minds in Italy at that point of time. So when Gramsci saw that in 1917 a revolution did come in Russia, and when he went to the prison, you can see that it was already 9 years. He was concerned that Italy, Germany, or any other the Western European nation, they were capitalist economies. Capitalism had already matured over there, and as Marx had said, we have already seen class in itself to class for itself, that will happen in case of economies getting matured, where capitalism is in its matured state. So Gramsci saw that why is this revolution not taking place? In the whole of the Western nations, no revolution is taking place. Around 1918, 1920, 1922, there were some revolutions in Germany and Italy. but all those revolutions, they were violently suppressed by the state. And that is something went Gramsci into thinking that what is it that what are the reasons why this revolution is not taking place? What are the challenges? Or what are the factors where Marx has gone wrong? He was in the prison, and in prison you get enough time to think. So he thought, and then he said that what Marx has said about the superstructures, he has undermined the superstructure. He said that superstructures are not merely a reflection of the base, but they are structure in themselves. Okay? So we shall be looking at each of the elements, how he had. So the very first thing that he said was the revision of base and superstructure model. So if we go back to Marx, Marx had said about base and superstructure model that ultimately superstructure is nothing but reflection of the base, and if you change the base, you can very easily change the superstructure and whole state. In fact, the state itself is also part of superstructure as per Marx. Why? Because state is nothing but executive committee of the bourgeois. But Gramsci said that it's not like that. He gave the idea of integral state. Gramsci said that when you are talking about superstructures, they are not mere reflections, but they are structures in themselves. And he used a term called as civil society. Okay? For all these elements of superstructure, he used one term, that is civil society. Again, what is civil society? So you see, this is your private sphere. Okay, this is your public sphere where state is active, and between this, whatever exists, this is called as civil society. Okay, and he said that what is the role of civil society? The role of civil society is to generate consent in the favor of state, in the favor of existing class, that is in the favor of capitalists. For example, let us talk about the Mughal regime and British regime in India. When Mughals came, or for example, for that matter, let us take example of this Aurangzeb's era. At Aurangzeb era also, the state was there, the state was controlling everything. But was there a consent towards the center, that was the Mughal regime, among the common masses? The answer is no. Why? Because it was through domination, it was through coercion, it was through violence. So through violence, you generate animosity, you do not generate consent. And because of that, there were frequent conflicts, etc., etc. On the other hand, when you look at the British regime, Look at the British regime prior to 1900s. What was the Congress, Indian National Congress, what they were saying? That we are lucky that British are there. They are the one who gave the idea of rule of law. They will make India a modern society by introducing British institutions, bringing in idea of rule of law, constitutionalism, etc., etc. So what do you see here? You see that there was a consent among the masses, the elites, about the British regime. This is called as hegemony, because towards the British they had created this hegemony among the intellectuals. And how this hegemony could be created? Because all these intellectuals, they had already read in the British institutions. So naturally, they had a positive feeling, and that positive feeling, that is what you call as hegemony, that ultimately the exploiters, they get the consent of those who are being exploited, and that is called as hegemony. And who creates that hegemony? He says that ultimately this civil society is the site of creation of hegemony. Okay, so Gramsci, he has used some very different terms to explain this. So for state, Gramsci uses the term political society. Okay, so what is the present case, how Gramsci is trying to explain the state? He is showing that, okay, you have got this economy, okay, then you have got this civil society, and then you have got this state. So between the economy and the state, you have got this civil society. And what does this civil society do? This civil society creates acceptance among the masses towards the state. Though the nature of state, it remains exploitative. You see, the nature of state has not changed. But the civil society, what it does is that it presents the state in such a manner that you will say, oh, state is good for us. We want the state. And once there is acceptance towards the state, naturally there won't be any revolt, any revolution. The class solidarity that Marx was talking about among the proletariats, that itself has ended, because when there is acceptance, there is no scope for that feeling of resent. You will not be going for revolutions, and the state will continue. Next comes, what is this civil society? This civil society is nothing but all those elements of the superstructure, whether you talk about schools, or you talk about hospitals, or you talk about religion, or you talk about courts. What these civil society institutions do is that they give you a sense of neutrality. They say, the exploited class, that yes, we are working in your favor. So you need to support it. So you need to ensure its continuation. And when there is an affirmation, when there is the spirit of continuation, when there is the spirit of support, naturally the revolution won't take place and the capitalistic order continue. And this state and civil society, for this Gramsci uses the term integral state. Okay, state plus civil society, that is civil society plus political society. He also terms state as political society. So civil society plus political society, this is what Gramsci terms as integral Okay. So next is, so we have seen how he has revised the base and superstructure model of Marxism. Okay. Next is the idea of hegemony. So as we have seen, he has said that what does, just a sec. So when we are talking about there is state or political society, right? Then there is civil society. Gramsci has given specific roles. Gramsci says that what does the state or political society do? It has the role of coercion. And what does the civil society do? The civil society has the role of generating consent. And this consent, this generation of consent, this ideological domination, this sense of feeling among the exploited class, that is the proletariats, that ultimately the state is in our interest. We need to continuation of this existing order, this capitalistic order. This is what Gramsci terms as hegemony. And what does the state do? State does is domination. In one year questions, there was this question that what is the difference between domination and hegemony? So who does the hegemony? Who does the hegemony? It is done through civil society. Who does the domination? It is done through the state or the political society. What is the method? It is through generating consent. What is the method in case of domination? It is through coercion. After domination, what can be the outcome? There will be resentment, which can lead to revolution. But here, there is acceptance towards the state, and this leads to continuation. This is Gramscian idea of hegemony. So he has explained that ultimately the continuation of capitalistic order is not because of just the economy or the state being the element, the executive of the bourgeois, but through the civil society, through the institutions of civil society. The state is able to generate consent in the favor of the existing capitalistic order in the state, and that is why there is continuation. And regarding this, Gramsci has explained so we have discussed the idea of hegemony. There are two other terms. We have already discussed what is integral state, that is the civil society, and the political society, that is the civil society, and the state, that is integral state. So Gramsci has used these two terms that you will see, historical class and historical bloc. So when he talks about this historical bloc, it is not just about the state plus civil society. It also talks about the circumstances. It also talks about the prevailing ideas. So when all these things come together, they lead to creation of a historical bloc. And in this historical bloc, the class that is associated, that is called as historical class. So this idea of historical class and historical bloc, this is an effort by Gramsci to explain that how the existing order was changed and how it can be changed. So he says that just like this historical bloc was there, another bloc needs to be created. Okay? So when the subaltern class, when the proletariats, they will have their own historical bloc, that is the state, that is the civil society. How the civil society, that we will see about the role of counter hegemony. And then there must also be ideas, there must also be circumstances. When all this will come together, ultimately this will lead to creation of historical bloc, and through that the revolution can be brought, the existing order can be challenged, the existing order can be. Okay, so this is what he has explained about. So there are three terms. One is integral state, another is historical class, another is historical bloc. So Gramsci also talks about, when he was talking about this integral state, we have seen it was the civil society plus political society. So naturally the question comes, what is the role of civil society? We have already seen what is it? Creation of hegemony, right? What it does? Generation of consent in the favor of the state. Okay, and he says that this civil society, it also acts as a cushion, that suppose there is any sort of revolution that is building up, so at the level of civil society there will be institutions which explain that how the state is important, how the state is working in the favor of proletariat. So ultimately the tension will not reach up to the state, there won't be building up of tension, there won't be revolutions, there won't be violence, and ultimately that will act as cushion. And while explaining this, Gramsci has talked about two types of state. One is transparent state, another is opaque state. What is a transparent state? A transparent state is such where no civil society is present. Okay, and an opaque state is such where civil society is present. So just now we saw that how the role of civil society is to act as a cushion against any revolution, against any this sense of resentment against the state. So if it is a opaque state, civil society is there to shield the state, and thus revolution bringing here is far more difficult. And that is why he says that in the Western developed economies, matured economies, since civil society is present, that is the reason why revolution could not take place. But he says that look at Russia. In Russia, what happened was that it was a transparent state where civil society was not present. So when civil society is not present, when the exploitation increases, there is no one to cushion against the state, where there is no institution for creation of hegemony and continuation of hegemony. So as a result, revolutions come and the existing order is changed, the state is challenged. And that is something what happened in case of Russia, and that is why in 1917 Bolshevik revolution took place and communism could be established in Russia. So he explains that because of absence of civil society in Russia, since Russia was a transparent state, the revolution could come. But despite Marx's assertion that in mature economies In mature capitalistic societies, ultimately revolution would come. But this is the reason, since they are opaque states, since there is civil society to shield them against resentments, there is civil society for continuation of hegemony, for continuation of ideological domination, to explain to the proletariats that state is ultimately in their interest, that revolution could not. Okay? And then a very important idea regarding Gramsci is his theory on intellectual. So Gramsci has said something very interesting that I have written over here. He has said that all men are intellectuals, but not all men have in society the function of intellect. It means that every person has intellect, every person has intelligence, but not all person, every person cannot perform that role when he is talking about in the society the function of intellectual. Ultimately he is talking about organic intellectuals. Okay? So what are these organic intellectuals? What are the traditional intellectuals? Let us just look at that. Okay? So naturally Gramsci says that ultimately in the civil society, it is the role of civil society to perform the continuation of consent, okay, in the favor of the state. But then the question comes that whenever the existing order changed, that is previously it was the lords and serfs, from there it was capitalists and proletariats, then how was this changed? How did this come? There he explains the role of intellectuals, and he has divided intellectuals into two categories. One is traditional intellectuals and another is organic intellectuals. So traditional intellectuals, you can see from name itself that those intellectuals which have traditionally been there, like you are talking about priests, church priests, pope, philosophers, they are traditional intellectuals. They are not associated with any class. Then another thing is that they have got a traditional acceptance and legitimacy. And whenever a revolution comes, whichever revolution comes, for example, suppose a revolution comes, still the need for churches will be there, the need for hospitals will be there, right? So the traditional intellectual, they will continue to be there, and they will, what they would do, they will simply associate them with the new order, with the new dominant class. Okay, so this is what he has explained about the intellectual. Next comes the role of organic intellectuals. So organic intellectuals, they are the one who generate ideas, consent in favor of particular class. Okay, so this is what he is saying in that statement, that not every person can perform the role of intellectual in the society. He is saying that not every person has that role. For example, when you look at current Indian politics, you see previously it was the Congress, and the Congress government, it has got a particular ideology. you are looking at the BJP government, it has got a particular ideology. You will suddenly see that whether it is on YouTube or in case of newspaper articles or other public discourses, there are a set of people who are now more active, who will explain you in the favor of BJP. Previously, there were another set of people who were writing books, articles, etc. in the favor of Congress. It's not that the Congress intellectuals, they are not there. But now, those in the favor of BJP, they are far more there. And that is how they generate consent in the society towards the BJP. And just change the Congress and BJP with bourgeois and proletariats, one against the other. You can very simply understand the role of organic intellectuals. So he says that organic intellectuals, they are very much critical, they are most important, because ultimately whosoever the traditional intellectuals are, once you are able to change the order, once you are able to generate consent in your favor, it will be far more easier for the traditional intellectuals, they will simply come with you. So that is why he has explained about the role of intellectuals, and he has given a very specific idea that how it is the intellectuals, whatever the ideas they give, they are not free from political biases. They are always in favor of a particular class. And that is why he has talked about the organic intellectual. And the last one is two-stage revolution. In the two-stage revolution, again the role of intellectuals become far more important. So we have already seen that in case of Marx, there was single stage revolution, class in itself becomes class for itself, there is revolution, establishment of socialism, then it is communism. Gramsci says it's not that easy, as Marx has said, because we have already seen that in the Western matured economies, the revolution as predicted, as expected by Karl Marx, that has not taken place. So he explains that now the revolution needs to be two-staged. The first one is at the level of civil society, because ultimately you will have to generate consent in your favor. So he says that it is counter-hegemony. Against the hegemony of the capitalistic class, you have to create a counter-hegemony. This will be at the level of civil society. And once this counter-hegemony has been created, then you simply at the level of state, you go through again a revolution and you capture the state. Okay? So this at the level of civil society, this is something he says that war of position. That you position yourself that my ideas are the dominant ideas, so that at the level of civil society there is an acceptance that the existing capitalistic order, this is wrong, and there is a need for a newer order, an order dominated by proletariats, that is ideological domination. And then at the level of state, he terms this as war of maneuver. This is non-violent and this is violent. Okay, but then comes how to create this counter hegemony, right? So he says that he gives an idea called as subaltern class. Again, you can see the difference with respect to Marx. What Marx has said, that there will be polarization of classes, only proletariats will be there and capitalists will be there. He says that the proletariats, they need to come together with other segments with identical goal. All those sections of the society who face this threat, who face this challenge from the, who face exploitation from this existing capitalistic order, you go for a coalition with them. So he says there needs to be a coalition of subaltern class, and then you have to create a counter hegemony. Then they need to have their own organic intellectual. He talks about the floor managers and all. They are the one who can be the organic intellectuals. He talks about that the proletariats, they need to have their own organic intellect, and it is these organic intellectuals, through their words, through their writings, sorry, through their statements, they will develop counter hegemony, and this counter hegemony will be in the favor of proletariats and against the capitalistic, and this will be at the level of civil society. And once this counter hegemony has been created, now there is no more issue, because now there is acceptance that your order should be there. So once there is an acceptance that your order should be there, you go for that war of maneuver, you go for that violent revolution, you capture the state, and then simply communism can be, okay. So this is how we have seen what Gramsci sees. All these key terms have focus, and in case of Gramsci, always this, most of the questions will be around this idea of hegemony. Once the idea of hegemony comes, all the key terms, counter hegemony, intellectuals, war of position, war of maneuvers, coalition of subaltern class, have their own organic intellectuals, they need to be there. I shall be discussing one of the PYQs. But before I go for PYQs, let us discuss the difference between Marx and Gramsci, because this can be a very potent question. You can always get, the way UPSC is asking now, there are no more the direct questions, they are continuously reducing and they are looking at the conceptual clarity. So this can be one such question, okay. Marx, Gramsci, okay. You need not go anywhere, do not think it too much. The very first thing is, first difference is that about the base and superstructure, idea of superstructure, right? What had Marx said? They do not have independent existence, ultimately they are just reflection of the base, right? In case of Gramsci, you say they also have independent existence, and he gave the idea of civil society, right? Then with respect to, when you talk about intellectuals, No role. You will talk about critical. Why is it critical? To create. Oh. Why is it critical? For creation of hegemony. Okay. So he has talked about सिंगल स्टेज रेवोल्यूशन. इसने क्या बात की है? टू स्टेज रेवोल्यूशन, राइट? So these are some of the differences that you can find. Then again you can talk about how he has talked about the integral state. He has then talked about transparent versus opaque state. He has only talked about state, only one type of state, that is capitalistic state. Okay, so these are the differences and you can simply look at it and you can find the differences. Let me just, yes, this was the first slide. Let us start looking at the differences. Base and superstructure, we saw how you the difference. Then in case of classes, he did talk about. Then he was talking about polarization of classes, but in case of creating counter hegemony, Gramsci has talked about coalition of classes, coalition of like-minded groups. Okay, then class in itself to class for itself, that is polarization. He has not talked about that polarization, rather he has talked about the idea of counter hegemony, single stage, double stage, that we have already seen. Okay, so this is the difference. Now let us go back to I hope this statement it is sufficiently clear. All men are intellectuals, which means every person has intellectual capacity, but not all men in civil society. So he is talking about organic intellectuals, and you will say how he talks about the role of intellectual organic intellectuals. He differentiates them between traditional and organic intellectuals, and organic intellectuals, they have a responsibility to generate consent in the favor of the state. And then this particular statement that I have given, you can note it down, is that where normally we have seen, we say that how he has revised, how he has criticized Marxism, but Taxier says that there is no divergence. Okay, because ultimately both are talking about economy. मार्क्स जो है वो पूरे का पूरा स्ट्रक्चरल कंडीशन के बारे में ही इज कंसर्न्ड, but Gramsci is only focused on the superstructure. So ultimately that complements the Marxist project. So suppose a question comes regarding the differences between Gramsci and Marx, so there you can simply conclude with, as Taxier has said, that both are focused on the economy, and while Marx is focusing on overall structural conditions and Gramsci focuses only on superstructures, thus he complements. With that you can simply conclude it. Okay, so I have got one PYQ and I shall be discussing that. Apart from this, there was another question which was slightly different, that was with respect to difference between hegemony and domination. During the discussion I have already explained, domination by the state, it is coercive, hegemony by the civil society, okay, it is consensus driven, then domination leads to animosity, hegemony leads to acceptance or consent towards the state. Okay, so now let us look at this question. The question is, according to Gramsci, hegemony is primarily based on organization of consent. Comment. This is a question from 2019 and it is a 20 marker. So when such a question comes and mind you, this is a 20 marker, so you need to write minimum 3.5 page. So in this 3.5 page, you can bring in all ideas of Gramsci, but in a particular manner. Because when you are looking at Gramsci, every idea of Gramsci itself is talking about hegemony. So you can see based on organization of consent. So you will explain how Gramsci has said that consent is organized at the level of civil society towards the state, and then later on you will go on to explain it, that how he suggests about creating a counter hegemony. So let us talk about the structuring. Okay. So in the let me get the full page. Okay. The question in the introduction, you will explain about simply hegemony. Okay. Do not go for okay. Gramsci, he was the theoretician of superstructure. He was an Italian who rescued Marxism from being a crude economic determinism. वो सब कंक्लूजन के लिए बचा करके रखना है. देखो क्वेश्चन पर सेंट्रल टर्म क्या है. सेंट्रल टर्म है, फोकस है हेजेमनी पर. तो इंट्रोडक्शन में यू विल एक्सप्लेन हेजेमनी, that Gramsci has given the idea of hegemony, which means ideological domination. Okay, by the civil society in the interest of the state, which results in the proletariat's continued acceptance towards the state and prevents any revolution against the state. This will be your introduction, and after that you will go for the body part. In the body part, you will explain how Gramsci has given the idea of hegemony. So you will say that Gramsci has said that, first explaining the role of civil society. Okay, it is the site for generation of consent. Okay, that how the civil society, it acts as a cushion, and he explains that ultimately it is in the interest of the proletariats, and that leads to continuation. Uske baad you will talk about role of organic intellectuals. यहाँ पे you will explain that discussing the role of intellectuals, Gramsci has divided it between traditional and organic intellectuals. While traditional intellectuals, they give the impression of neutrality and are associated with the traditional institutions. It is the organic intellectuals who develop ideas and theories in the favor of the existing class, that is the capitalist class. And it is through these ideas that the proletariats, that the workers, they continue to work. Okay. And then you will also explain about the transparent and opaque state, that where civil society is not there, it is far more easier to bring revolution, and where civil society is present in those states, it termed as opaque state, where it is difficult to bring in revolution, and because the civil society is there to push. यहाँ पे हो गया. अब आप आओगे ये कैसे सजेस्ट करता है, तो आप यहाँ पे बोलोगे फॉर प्रोलेटारिएट्स. क्या बोलता है? इन ऑर्डर टू ब्रिंग इन द रेवोल्यूशन और चेंज द एग्जिस्टिंग ऑर्डर. उसने किस चीज की बात की है? उसने बात की है क्रिएशन ऑफ काउंटर हेजेमनी. काउंटर हेजेमनी का मतलब यू विल एक्सप्लेन दैट इन द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ द प्रोलेटारिएट, इसके लिए उसने क्या बोला है, देन यू विल टॉक अबाउट द subaltern class and having their own organic intellectuals. You will explain what is this. You will term that this generation of hegemony, he terms as war of position, and once that has been created, this will lead to war of maneuver. ओके तो इस तरीके से याद रखना, ये 20 मार्कर है, तो ऑन एवरी आइडिया यू विल हैव टू एक्सपैंड इट, यू विल हैव टू एक्सप्लेन इट. आई एम जस्ट मेंशनिंग कीवर्ड्स, यू हैव टू एक्सपैंड इट. हाउएवर यू सी हेजेमनी के केस में देखो, प्राइमरली दो स्कॉलर रहेंगे who have criticized this idea. The first one is Althusser. Althusser कहता है कि ये ओवर डिटर्मिनिस्टिक है, ओवर सिंप्लीफाइड है, and Gramsci has ignored the role of existing structures that leads to continuation of capitalistic order. याद रखना, अल्थ्यूजर खुद में एक स्ट्रक्चरल मार्क्सिस्ट है, तो ये हमेशा स्ट्रक्चर्स की ही बात करेगा. एंड सेकेंड यू हैव गॉट फूको, और फूको ने भी बात किया है, ये बहुत ही ज्यादा सिंप्लीफाई कर दिया है, जबकि फूको ही हैज टेकन अ पोस्ट मॉडर्निस्ट व्यू, ही हैज टेकन अ पोस्ट स्ट्रक्चरलिस्ट व्यू, दैट हाउ द हेजेमनी और द कंटिन्यूएशन ऑफ एग्जिस्टिंग ऑर्डर, इट goes on at multiple level and not simply at the role of simply to the organic intellectuals only. तो देखो, एक क्रिटिसिज्म स्ट्रक्चरल मार्क्सिज्म से आ गया और दूसरा क्रिटिसिज्म आ गया पोस्ट मॉडर्निज्म या पोस्ट स्ट्रक्चरलिज्म से. एंड आफ्टर दैट यू विल सिंपली कंक्लूड दैट डिस्पाइट दिस क्रिटिसिज्म, Gramsci's idea of hegemony has been a central idea to inspire the neo-Marxists, okay, and it has saved Marxism from being a crude economic determinism and made it a more sophisticated framework of reference. जो आप ऊपर में लिख रहे थे वो लास्ट में लिखना, राइट दैट इन द डाउन. तो बिकॉज वी ऑलवेज कंक्लूड बाय टॉकिंग अबाउट द इंपॉर्टेंस, द सिग्निफिकेंस, एंड बाय राइटिंग दिस वी हैव एक्सप्लेन्ड द सिग्निफिकेंस. ओके, तो आई होप आई कुड एक्सप्लेन, एंड if you have got any doubts you can always answer in the comment, and if there are other topics that you want me to explain, that you want me to discuss in detail, please do write in the comments. Thank you very much.